Max Cavalera once stood at the epicenter of a global musical earthquake, where down-tuned guitars and ritualistic drum patterns propelled Brazilian metal straight onto the world map. He was the architect of songs that made hundreds of thousands of fans scream in unison, yet also the man who walked away from the very band that forged his name at its most bitter moment. When everything seemed firmly in his grasp, Max chose to step outside, leaving behind fame, power, and a legacy left unfinished. Behind the image of a ferocious stage leader lies a journey marked by loss, where talent constantly runs alongside tragedy. Max did not rise along a paved path. He was thrown into music as a way to survive poverty, trauma, and a gnawing sense of betrayal. Every successful album brought heavier pressure. On every step forward, cut deeper rifts no one wanted to face. The more aggressive his music became, the more his inner life was stretched to the breaking point. What makes Max Cavalera so elusive is not only his controversial decisions, but the lifelong contradictions he embodies. Fiercely loyal, yet willing to abandon everything. Carrying a tribal spirit while operating within a ruthless industry, searching for inner truth amid the glare and violence of fame. Max's story is not simply the history of a metal artist. It is the journey of a human being repeatedly choosing between power and the self, and paying the price for every choice. That decision to step away from the spotlight did not emerge out of nowhere. It was formed early on, in years when Max Cavalera knew nothing of stages, contracts, or fame, only the fragile sense of a home that could collapse at any moment. Long before he became a global metal icon, he was a boy growing up in cramped rooms in Belo Horizonte, where the future was not something to dream about, but something to endure day by day. Max was born in 1969, into a family marked by post-war European migration. His father worked for the Italian consulate in Brazil, a job that provided a rare sense of stability amid a volatile social climate. The family once stood on the brink of a major transition, leaving Brazil to return to Europe and start over in Rome. That plan ended abruptly when his father died of a heart attack at the age of 41. With no financial cushion and no preparation, that single death knocked the family off a trajectory they believed they still controlled. Forced to leave São Paulo, Max and his mother returned to Belo Horizonte to live in his grandmother's small house, a crowded space marked by scarcity, where several people shared a handful of rooms and a single bathroom. This was not merely a material decline, but a prolonged psychological fall, especially for a child losing both emotional support and any sense of a foreseeable future. In that heavy atmosphere, Max began to develop an inner tension shaped by gloom, anger, and a deep feeling of abandonment. Music entered his life not as a romantic choice, but as an instinctive response. Heavy metal records, especially Black Sabbath, offered him a language everyday life did not. Noise loud enough to drown out helplessness, rhythms heavy enough to keep the listener upright. From that moment on, music was no longer a hobby. It became the way Max Cavalera clung to the world, piece by piece, as every familiar structure around him collapsed. Music soon went beyond serving as emotional shelter. It turned into a life-or-death decision, made in circumstances where every choice was extreme. When Max reached adolescence, the bond between him and his younger brother Igor was no longer just familial. It became a survival alliance. They shared the same cramped space, the same persistent anxiety, and then the same early realization. If they did not carve out an escape themselves, they would be swallowed by their circumstances. Sepultura was born from that point, not as a band, but as an instinctive reaction to being pushed to the margins of society. In the early days, Max was influenced by classic rock, from Black Sabbath to Motorhead, but he was quickly drawn toward more extreme sounds. raw, fast, and openly confrontational. Extreme metal gave him a structure through which to release the nameless rage that had been accumulating for years. Dropping out of school was not an impulsive act of rebellion. It felt more like a cold severing. School offered no tangible promise, while music, however uncertain, provided a rare sense of control. Sepultura's constantly shifting early lineup mirrored that instability. People came and went, rehearsals lacked proper equipment, and songs were written in conditions of material scarcity but emotional overload. Signing with Cogomelo Records was not a moment of triumph, but a leap into the unknown. Bestial devastation was recorded hastily, and its sound so raw it nearly defied the production standards of the time. Yet that very roughness revealed what Max was pursuing, not perfection, but honesty toward the emotions boiling beneath the surface. Morbid Visions carried the same spirit forward, darker, more violent, and Troops of Doom emerged as a declaration, shaped by old idols while hinting at a desire for self-definition. In these recordings, listeners hear more than music. They hear the urgency of people who know there is no way back. The decision to leave Belo Horizonte for São Paulo was not simply about finding a bigger stage. It was a conscious trade, giving up what little sense of safety remained in exchange for the chance to be seen. The new city brought different pressures, harsher competition, higher survival costs, and the constant feeling of being tested. But it was there that Sepultura began to step out of the local underground shadows, carrying a sound that was still unrefined, yet fierce enough to be impossible to ignore. The shift away from the underground did not happen through a gentle leap. It felt more like being dragged into the light before one's eyes had time to adjust to the dark. When Sepultura entered the orbit of Roadrunner Records, Max Cavalera was not only facing opportunity, but an entirely new kind of pressure. For the first time, his music was no longer just the scream of those on the margins. It had become a product scrutinized by a ruthless industry. For Max, this was the moment of an unspoken question. Preserve the original ferocity or accept refinement in order to survive longer. Beneath the Remains was recorded under extreme tension. Working in a professional studio environment for the first time, Sepultura had to learn how to control the energy that had once been fed by chaos. The icy riffs, relentless speed, and Max's hoarse vocal assault did not lose their primal instinct, but were placed within a tighter structure, strong enough to signal to listeners in Europe and North America that this was not a local band testing its luck. The album quickly broke beyond Brazil, cited as a late 1980s thrash metal landmark, and led to the band's first tours, where Max stood before audiences who had never heard of Belo Horizonte, yet were immediately pulled into the sonic storm. Appearances on MTV, especially during metal programming, put Max in a paradoxical position. A man shaped by deprivation had become a visible representative of a global metal wave, while internally still carrying the sense of not quite belonging. Arise pushed that contradiction further. The music grew sharper, more confident, almost merciless. The album entered the Billboard 200, a milestone that only a few years earlier would have seemed unimaginable even to Max himself. Songs like Arise and Dead Embryonic Cells reflected not only technical maturity, but a world view growing more confrontational, where rage was reorganized into declaration. The peak of this phase came at Rock in Rio 2. Standing before a crowd of more than 100,000, Max was no longer performing only for Sepultura, but for an entire region long treated as peripheral to the metal world. The moment carried a fierce pride, but it also planted the seeds of new pressures. Rising expectations, relentless schedules, and the realization that the machine called Sepultura had begun to move faster than its creator's capacity to absorb it. After Rock in Rio, Sepultura no longer moved, like a band searching for its place. They entered a phase in which every decision carried the weight of a brand expanding too quickly. Chaos AD emerged from that context, as Max Cavalera began pushing the music beyond pure thrash into heavier, slower, more crushing groove. The riffs were no longer built to showcase speed, and they were designed to pulverize, to make crowds move as a single mass. The sound broadened the band's reach, while quietly raising questions about who truly controlled Sepultura's direction. Lyrically, the focus shifted from abstract anger to direct confrontation with state violence, political repression, and invisible systems of power. Chaos AD was no longer an album meant only for the metal community. It entered a wider social space, reflected in its sales. A gold certification in the United States, close to 500,000 copies, confirming that Sepultura had crossed beyond the threshold of a genre phenomenon. On stage, collective energy reached rare intensity. At times, the band's cohesion felt frictionless, as if it were operating as a single organism, without gaps or resistance. Yet within this seemingly perfect state, the balance of power began to shift. Exhaustive touring, international media attention, and ever-rising expectations pushed the Sepultura machine beyond a human rhythm. Max, frontman, primary songwriter, and the face pursued by the press, gradually became the focal point of all decisions. Creative ideas revolved around him more often, interviews centered on him more frequently, and pressure concentrated on him more intensely. That concentration was both fuel and fault line. When a creative center also becomes a media center, the boundary between individual contribution and collective authority begins to blur. Chaos AD therefore marked not only a creative peak, but the moment Sepultura first confronted the paradox of success. The larger they grew, the harder it became to bridge the distance between members, even as they continued to stand side by side on the same stage. As Sepultura entered its next phase, every familiar boundary was pushed aside. Roots was not conceived as a conventional follow-up album, but as a deliberate swerve, one in which Max Cavalera sought to pull the entire band back toward the deepest layers of Brazilian identity, not as cultural decoration, but as the music's driving force. Leaving the urban studio environment to record at Indigo Ranch carried meaning beyond a simple change of location. It was a way of stepping outside the industrial rhythm, allowing raw, instinctive, sometimes chaotic ideas to exist long enough before being shaped. The sound of Roots slowed down and grew heavier. Down-tuned guitars created the sensation of the ground shaking rather than bursting into flames. Brazilian tribal elements were no longer ornamental. They became the rhythmic backbone. Ross Robinson pushed the band to play as if confronting their own limits directly, letting things unfold naturally, even when they slipped out of control. When the recordings were handed to Andy Wallace, that rawness was gathered and refined just enough. Not stripped of its primal weight, but sharpened so it could travel globally. Roots quickly exceeded the scope of a metal album. Sales approaching 2 million copies reflected not only commercial success, but an ability to shape an emerging movement. And thick groove patterns and simple yet high-pressure structures became the foundation for the NU metal wave that followed. Roots' Bloody Roots echoed everywhere like a slogan, a declaration of identity that audiences across cultures could shout along with, whether or not they understood Portuguese. Yet as the album reached historic stature, Sepultura's internal structure began to fracture more clearly than ever. Creative, managerial, and media decisions increasingly revolved around Max and Gloria, who held a pivotal role in directing the band's operations. On the other side, the remaining members felt a growing sense of misalignment, less about musical disagreement than about being pushed away from the center of decision-making. Roots, therefore, stood as both the peak that secured Sepultura's place in global metal history and the point where the seeds of division rose to the surface, crystallizing into two opposing forces coexisting within the same band. The tension did not explode immediately after Roots. It accumulated through details that seemed minor at first: how tour schedules were arranged, how the band's image appeared in the press, how decision-making power gradually narrowed to a single axis. Gloria Cavalera was not only Max's wife, she was the manager, the coordinator, the intermediary between the band and a rapidly accelerating media business machine. As Sepultura became a global brand, that role grew heavier, and it was there that doubts began to take shape. For the other members, the line between professional management and personal favoritism became increasingly blurred. Media choices were read as signals of imbalance. When images of Max and his family occupied the center, at the sense that the band was shifting away from a collective toward an individual became unmistakable. Within that vortex, Monsters of Rock 1996 was not merely a tour stop. News of Dana Wells struck suddenly, severing a system already stretched to its limit. Max and Gloria left the festival immediately. Sepultura went on stage as a trio, a decision born of necessity, yet one that laid bare the widening crack. The days that followed brought no reconciliation. Instead, they forced a confrontation. The remaining members decided to terminate Gloria's management contract, viewing it as a necessary step to preserve the band's collective structure. For Max, this was not simply a management issue. It was a matter of loyalty at the most painful moment. Arguments escalated, reaching a breaking point in Argentina, where months of suppressed words spilled out uncontrollably. The final show at Brixton Academy unfolded under the heavy air of an ending long anticipated. The option to stay had been offered under one condition: Gloria's removal from management. Max refused. He chose to walk away, even knowing he could have retained the band's name, the authority, the legacy they had built together. That decision was not driven by a calculation of power, but by a personal boundary he would not cross. Music could change, but allegiance in the midst of grief was not something to be negotiated. Leaving Sepultura did not open the door to freedom. It pulled Max into a psychological void so heavy that he nearly disappeared from himself. For 6 months, there was no stage, no rehearsal room, so no music to cling to. He withdrew into enclosed spaces, letting alcohol and substances replace a life once measured by tours and recording sessions. The most frightening part was not physical collapse, but the fact that music, the very thing that had once saved him, became something he could not bear to touch. Familiar songs triggered too many things at once: lost power, family dragged into the storm, a band torn apart in a way that left no winners. In the press, both sides continued firing at each other, every headline stretching the conflict further, turning a breakup into a public wound that refused to heal. It was in that darkness that a new idea slowly took shape, not as a return, but as a way forward. Soulfly emerged not as a replacement project, but as a safe space where Max could rebuild himself on his own terms. The debut album, released in 1998, entered the world with raw, confrontational energy and immediately generated significant commercial pull, surpassing the sales of Sepultura's release that same year. But numbers were only the surface. Beneath them, Soulfly allowed Max to say things he could not say before. Spirituality as an anchor, resistance as a survival instinct, identity that refused to dissolve inside a machine. Heavy drums, down-tuned guitars, and open song structures created room for personal ritual. No need to prove, no need to ask permission. Over the next 2 decades, Soulfly became a durable pillar. By releasing 12 studio albums with constantly shifting lineups while preserving its creative core. Each release cycle was a reaffirmation of autonomy, choosing collaborators, choosing themes, choosing how to exist. Free from tense meetings and internal deadlock, Max returned music to its most basic role, as a tool for dialogue with himself. And from there, redefined his post-Sepultura path through consistency rather than noise. As Soulfly stabilized, Max's creative energy did not contract. It branched outward. Parallel projects appeared not to fill gaps, but to release musical impulses that could not fit inside a single frame. Nail Bomb was one of the earliest pressure releases. Harsh, abrasive, industrial metal, infused with urban tension and the naked rage of a period when everything felt compressed against its limits. The sound sought no polish, it sought impact, a way of speaking plainly when patience for compromise had run out. Then a phone call in 2006 shifted the trajectory. Reconnecting with Igor was not driven by nostalgia, but by the urgency of continuing to play together while time still allowed it. Cavalera Conspiracy was born from that moment, carrying a sense of "we are still here." Not an attempt to fully recreate the past, but enough to reconnect a core that had once been severed. The albums that followed stayed direct and heavy, focused on rhythm and force, as if the brothers were rediscovering a shared language after years of silence. At another extreme, Killer Be Killed brought together strong personalities in a space where thrash, hardcore, and groove intertwined through collective discipline. Max did not stand atop a pyramid of authority there. He flowed within it, letting the music speak for itself. With Probot, the track Red War offered yet another angle. Reverence for classic metal heritage driven by present-day weight. No nostalgia, no softening. By 2023, the decision to re-record early Sepultura albums ignited controversy. To some, it was an attempt to reclaim a legacy. To others, an unnecessary intervention. But within Max's creative logic, the act resembled a recalibration, bringing music born from scarcity back to the power, density, and breadth he had always imagined for it. No permission sought from collective memory, no avoidance of backlash, just a continuation of the momentum that had shaped him all along. When there is still something to say, music will find its own way forward. Those creative offshoots cannot be separated from the anchor that has accompanied Max through every turn. Gloria Cavalera. They met at a time when Max carried both the hunger for success and the insecurity of an artist just stepping out of the underground. Gloria entered his life not as a spectator, but as someone who understood the rhythm of music and the machinery behind it. Their bond grew out of travel, long backstage nights, and decisions that had to be made when no one else was willing to take the lead. Their marriage became intertwined with work early on. Loving each other meant sharing responsibility for every advance and every risk. Family life took shape within relentless touring schedules, children growing up between rehearsal rooms and tour buses. Gloria was simultaneously wife, manager, and the steady pulse holding an expanding ecosystem together. That closeness became a rare strength. Max had a partner who understood music from the inside and was prepared to defend creative choices to the end. At the same time, the structure carried inevitable tension. As Sepultura swelled into a global brand, every strategic decision was examined through the lens of who benefits, and Gloria's position became a focal point of controversy. The family was pulled directly into the spotlight, where every photograph and every headline could be read as a statement of power. Personal tragedy pushed that relationship into its harshest test. And the death of Dana Wells did not only take a child, it tore open the boundary between private life and professional obligation. In the midst of grief, choosing to stand with each other became non-negotiable. Max did not separate love from work. He fused them into a single principle, even when the price was the collapse of a band. After leaving Sepultura, months of self-destruction tested the marriage in the most unforgiving way. Gloria confronting loss, holding the family together, and waiting for music to return as a source of life. When Soulfly took shape, their marriage shifted into a different state, less ostentatious, more resilient. The children entered music organically, not as a plan, but as the house's natural breath. Gloria remained calm, pragmatic, guarding the family's boundaries against waves of media scrutiny that stretched on for years. Their relationship was not built on ease, but on the ability to stand on the same side when everything pushed back, an alliance both emotional and strategic, where love is inseparable from responsibility and personal choice is always placed above the convenience of fame. That choice to stand together extended beyond marriage. It shaped how they built their family. They have 4 children, each coming of age during different phases of Max's career, when fame, conflict, and rebirth constantly overlapped. The first child, Max Cavalera, born in 1985, grew up as Sepultura struggled in the underground and then exploded internationally. Richie chose his own path early on as a guitarist and vocalist in metal hardcore projects, never standing in his father's shadow and consistently working to separate himself from the Cavalera name through an independent style and presence. Zion Cavalera, born in 1992, is directly tied to the period when Sepultura entered the global machine. Raised on tour buses, he witnessed both the peaks and the collapse, later becoming Soulfly's drummer in 2012. For Zion, the father-son bond runs parallel to a professional one. Max offers no favoritism and no shelter, and Zion carries heavier stage pressure than anyone else simply by bearing the Cavalera name. The third child, Igor Amadeus Cavalera, born in 1996, the same year Roots was released and Sepultura fractured, carries a family memory marked by separation and restructuring. He plays bass, sings, and collaborates with his father in the project Go Ahead and Die, where the music is raw, political, and uncompromising. This is a generational collaboration, not nostalgic, not imitative, but using legacy as material for resistance. The youngest, Max Cavalera, born in 2002, appears far less in the public eye, keeping distance from the stage and the industry. Phoenix's privacy reflects a conscious family choice after years of media intrusion. Not every Cavalera child is meant to stand in the spotlight. The Cavalera family, therefore, does not operate as a performance dynasty, but as a living structure where music is a shared language and each person is free to speak in their own voice. Max does not pass down fame. He passes down the capacity to endure pressure, discipline, and honesty toward one's own sound. The very qualities that once cost him everything, and the same qualities that have kept this family standing through decades of upheaval. From the family sphere back to the broader stage of metal history, Max Cavalera's imprint is not measured by how long he topped charts or how many records he sold, but by how he bent the trajectory of a genre long shaped by Europe and North America. Bringing Brazil, with its tribal rhythms, language, colonial history, and social violence, into the center of global metal reshaped how identity in heavy music could be understood. Metal was no longer a technical imitation. It became a space for localization, where stories from the margins could enter the sanctum. From classic thrash to groove, From industrial to nu metal, the layers of influence set in motion by Max's choices continue to be heard across generations. That legacy also takes the form of a way of living, refusing to bow to the machine, yet never pretending to stand outside it. That Max accepts collision, pays the price, then rebuilds. He walks away from power when it threatens personal boundaries and starts over with music as an act of self-determination. Controversy has never disappeared, from the Sepultura split to the re-recording of legacy material. But it is precisely this refusal to compromise that keeps his story in dialogue, rather than sealing it off in safe consensus. At this stage of life and career, Max Cavalera does not need to prove his place in history. He exists as a living, moving force, writing, touring, collaborating, passing the stage to the next generation without letting go of the wheel. If metal was once a refuge for those pushed to the margins, Max's journey shows that refuge can become a global language without losing its roots. If Max's music ever made you feel for the first time that metal had a soul, or if a song once carried you through difficult years, leave a line and share it. And if you want to keep following the stories behind the legends, where talent, tragedy, and personal choice collide, support the channel so we can continue opening journeys like this one.